New report this month launched by CNA and their Military Advisory Board entitled Powering America's Defense, Energy, and the Risks to National Security. If you did not pick one up outside, I urge you to do so. We're thrilled to have this session with CNA and two members of the Military Advisory Board, including the chairman. We're fortunate because this is not the first time that we've had CNA and their insights in the room, so to speak. And we at the Environmental Change and Security Program are very pleased to have these discussions here. As you might glean from the name of our program, we are about trying to get these different communities to talk with one another, and there aren't, unfortunately, too many spaces, particularly on a nonpartisan, non-advocacy basis, as the Wilson Center is, to bring these very different worlds of energy, climate, environment, foreign policy, security policy together. But it is what we do here at the Wilson Center and what we have done since 1994. And Sherri Goodman has been with us since 1994 working these issues. She's been a terrific supporter of our program, even when we were back in the Smithsonian Castle. So we thank her and CNA now in her current post for doing that. When I started working on these issues in 1990, this constellation of climate and energy was, in the security context, we had the oil crisis and we saw that as a kind of an intuitive set of links. But really it was perceived that this is a longer term issue, it's a separate discussion, and it wasn't animating the environment and security, energy and security linkages, and it was kind of dismissed as a longer term problem, times to adjust, we'll buy our way out of the problem. And certainly times have changed. And it is in no small measure to the work that CNA and their Military Advisory Board has done. I think with this new report going forward, we will see it will have a similar effect that their 2007 report that focused on climate change and the implications for U.S. national security had in galvanizing attention, focusing attention, enunciating a voice that has not been let's say, as an expected part of the discussion, the security community, with this group of retired flag officers providing their assessment of how these issues did impact national security, with Sherri Goodman ably acting as executive director of both of those processes. So let me introduce our panelists and just turn the floor over to them because you're really here to hear them. Sherri Goodman, as I think many of you know, served as Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security for the 8 years of the Clinton-Gore administrations, where she was really on point on these issues within the Defense Department. She's now General Counsel and Corporate Secretary of CNA, and as I mentioned, serves as Executive Director of the Military Advisory Board for the reports looking at 2007 climate security, now energy and security, which obviously brings the climate dimension in, and as I mentioned, has been a long-time supporter and participant in the events that we have here at the Wilson Center. Next to Sherri is General Chuck Wald, who's retired from the U.S. Air Force. As chairman of the Military Advisory Board for this new report, was a board member for the 2007 CNA report, so really provides some continuity between those these two groups of senior retired military officers. He's director and senior advisor to the aerospace and defense industry for Deloitte, LLP. He was deputy commander for EUCOM, U.S. European Command, a position he held from 2002 till he retired in 2006, one that we certainly heard him speak very eloquently about when he was here 2 years ago, that as opposed to many of the postings, allowed him to look at a broad range of geographic areas, including a lot of time in Africa. So it was terrific that he could bring some of the insights from that experience into these discussions. So welcome back, General. Vice Admiral Dennis McGinn, retired from the U.S. Navy, is also a member of the Military Advisory Board. He became chairman and CEO of Remote Reality in January 2008 after 5 years at Battelle Memorial Institute, a shop that we all know is playing a big role in research on a variety of these issues. Admiral McGinn was the lead on Energy, Transportation, and Environment Division, so obviously right on on target for what we're discussing here. He previously had 35 years in the Navy as a naval aviator, test pilot, aircraft carrier, commanding officer, national security strategist. His last assignment was Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Warfare Requirements and Programs at the Pentagon, where he led the development of the U.S. Navy's future strategic capabilities, a post that I am sure served him well in trying to understand the links between energy, climate, and security in the context of this report. So it's really our privilege to have him here. Just a final word, we are webcasting the event live on the web, and then the video will be archived. So if there are folks for whom you'd like to bring this meeting to them after the fact, you will be able to point them in that direction. What it means for us practically today is that we ask when it comes time for the Q&A that you wait for one of my colleagues to bring you a microphone so folks online can hear your question. Those of you online, if you'd like to pose a question, particularly if you send it in early in the program, if you send it to ecsp@wilsoncenter.org, my colleagues will try to bring that question up. We'll try to get it into the discussion. So Sherri, please, may I turn the floor over to you. Again, welcome back to the Wilson Center.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here. I see many old friends and familiar faces in the audience. I'd like to start by paying tribute to Jeff for your leadership here at the Woodrow Wilson Center for Environmental Change and Security. You have been, Jeff, doing this work now, as you noted, since at least 1994. The Wilson Center has become really a hub for intellectual leadership and building intellectual capital in the field of environmental security. And it's through your leadership, your persistence, and the good team that you've built here that you have really made a difference in this field. And so I want to thank you for that, for your continued efforts. So I'd like to say a little bit about this report we just released last week, and also about how it connects with our work that we started a couple of years ago with the CNA's Military Advisory Board. The effort has been designed to address the national security implications of climate change and energy security, and to bring the voice of the military onto these fundamental set of, in my view, national security questions. Those of you who, like me, were working on environmental security back in the 90s, some of us even before, know that the discussions and the debates at that time had a different character. We were either talking about how we could improve cleanup of military installations, or we were going around in various ways trying to look gingerly at carbon emissions during the time of Kyoto, and we were beginning the effort that has, I think, really developed some intellectual capital now to really look at the security implications of environment. And what we really did in this first report was, with our group of military leaders, is to define climate change as a national security risk. And of course, we did that a couple of years ago when the debate about was the science about climate real and did it matter and could we take action now or not. And we really, I think, laid that to rest by saying, from the perspective of a military planner, you can't wait for 100% certainty on the battlefield, as General Sullivan, chairman of our first military advisory board, said. If you wait, you know something bad is going to happen. And that has helped, I think, move that debate forward. We also characterize climate change as a threat multiplier for instability in fragile regions of the world. Retreating glaciers, rising sea levels, reduced agricultural production, increasing health risks, increased migration of people across the globe as they seek higher land, more food, shelter, clean water. These are all threats that we are beginning to face now and will face at a much increased rate in the future. So it's important from a national and international security perspective that we understand those risks now and put in place systems and processes and work collaboratively with other nations to address them. That was really the essence, and I could say it in many more ways, much longer, of the first report. And Fortunately, action was taken immediately following it, and the first National Intelligence Assessment on Climate Change and National Security was produced. The National Defense Authorization Act required that the Department of Defense integrate the national security implications of climate change into the national security strategy and national defense strategy of the United States and the Quadrennial Defense Review. Some of the people working that action are in the room right now. And more power to you, because I think it's very important, very critical work that is underway to do this, and that will shape the force structure and our national security strategies into future decades. The report we released last week, chaired by General Wald, who will speak in just a couple of minutes, really brings together this question of energy, climate change, and national security to look at the vulnerabilities of our energy posture, the risks that we face as a nation and as a planet from our overdependence on fossil fuels and from our dependence on a vulnerable electric grid. Those two energy vulnerabilities have significant national security implications. They present an urgent and serious risk to our national security. They also, at the same time, present opportunities for us to use those challenges to transform our energy posture in the United States in ways that will result in lower carbon sources of energy in the future, bring us new technologies. And the military is an important piece of this equation, because the military is the nation's single largest user of energy in this country. Now, it's only about 1%, so that's relatively small, but what the military does can affect the nation, and the military has been a leader both in technology and in cultural change historically in our country. And so in the Wilsonian traditions of restoring American leadership globally, this is an opportunity, in our view, for the U.S. to meet its leadership challenges globally on energy and climate change, also looking at how we move our nation's largest energy user to lower carbon sources of fuel that at the same time will improve military effectiveness and reduce the burdens on our troops when they go into battle. So those are all important components of the work that we've done, that is underway in the Defense Department and across the government today, as the Obama administration has made very much a part of its priority looking at the challenges of energy, climate change, and national security, confronting those together and advancing technologies that will transform our economy and at the same time create green sector jobs. So I want to close just with one of my favorite stories. When I was at DOD in the 90s, I was once with Carol Browner, who was then head of EPA, and Bruce Babbitt, who was Secretary of Interior at the time, and Carol Browner said to Secretary Babbitt, the Defense Department and Sherri at Defense has, all these military bases to clean up, and that's just a really horrendous job, and it's a really tough job. And Secretary Babbitt, who at the time was trying to bring all the parts of the Interior Department together, he looked at Carol Browner and said, I think she has a really good job because she has the military behind her, and they know how to get things done. And that's absolutely true in my view, and so there's great opportunity in our nation today to really transform our military to improve effectiveness and efficiency, save the lives of our troops, and at the same time help lead our nation to a better energy future. So with that, I'd like to introduce the chairman of our Military Advisory Board, General Wald, who has been with us now on 2 projects, has had a very distinguished career in the United States Air Force. General Wald.
Thank you, Sherri, and everybody, and Jeff particularly for doing this. Glad to be back with you all. I want to, first of all, start out by thanking the other members of the Military Advisory Board. The only one that's here with me today is Denny, but there were several, as you can see in the report, and they all contributed. I have to say Denny probably contributed more than most of us, but they're good folks and they did a good job. And as Sherri mentioned, General Sullivan former Chief of Staff of the Army, led the last one. He was very active on this one as well. But my job as chairman today is going to be explain the key findings of the report. You'll have a chance to read it if you're interested later, but we'll go through it today. First of all, we found that America's current energy posture constitutes a serious and urgent threat to national security. That's a pretty significant statement, I think. And military people don't like to speak in hyperbole, I don't think. But the fact of the matter is, if it's true, which we believe it is, then it really demands immediate action. I think this situation can be exploited as a threat by those who wish to do us harm. One of the issues, of course, is that we import now today almost 70% of our oil. And for those that have followed this for a period of time, half of you in here probably weren't alive then, but some of you were, in the late 70s when President Carter made his pretty famous proclamation that the free flow of oil in the Middle East would be defended by military force if disrupted. It was a national doctrine. At that time, we were importing less than 30% of our oil, probably about 25%. So that's only 30 years ago. Now we're up towards 70%, so it's just getting worse. Some of the key findings we had that the energy threat impacts our military. Our inefficient use of oil adds to the already great risk assumed by our troops. It reduces combat effectiveness. It puts our troops more directly and more often in harm's way. Convoys right now today in the battlefield in Iraq and even worse in Afghanistan because of the paucity of oil and fuel in Afghanistan. 80% of the weight to the battlefield resupply is liquid, either water or fuel. And so many of our casualties, and you've all heard of the IEDs and EIDs that have done so much harm to many of our young people. Many of those people are in convoys carrying fuel to the battlefield. Additionally, ensuring the free flow of oil around the world stretches our military thin. When I was in War College here in Washington, D.C. in 1990, we talked a lot about strategic issues, and it became real apparent to us pretty often, not often, but very apparent to us that when a disruption of oil is threatened around the world, and this is a euphemistic bumper sticker, but what people expect to happen is dial 1-800 Navy and the Navy will show up and protect that oil. Well, you know, there's 191 other countries out there in the world that probably ought to contribute. But in fact, much of what we're doing in the military today can be directly related to the fact that we need oil to fuel our economy. Energy threats impact our foreign policy. Last night we had dinner with Jim Jones in a small group, the National Security Advisor. Jim was my immediate boss when we were in Europe in the last tour I had, and energy became an issue for us, for both NATO in his NATO hat and also for his U.S. European hat. And last night Jim proclaimed publicly again that climate change, climate issues are a national security threat to the United States and a national security issue, which is probably an unprecedented statement by a national security advisor, I would say. And he doesn't say things like that lightly. So, and the issue with foreign oil, and I say all oil, is we just don't have enough of that resource in our own country. Now, one of the dilemmas we have is that we're not going to get off using oil in the United States or any place in the world for a significant period of time. We're proclaiming that we need to reduce it as much as possible for a couple reasons. One is the foreign policy issue I just talked about. The other is the emissions issue under climate change and carbon. But for us to shift over to a different type of vehicle, for example, is one of our recommendations, would take somewhere between, they claim somewhere between 12 and 16 years in the United States to go to a full electric fleet if we had the technology today. During that period, then, we're going to have to continue to use oil. I read a study that with another group that looked at today, as many of you I'm sure know, we use about 21 million barrels of oil in the United States per day. Out of the 86 or so million in the world, 1/4 of the world's oil. If we do nothing, by 2025 we'll be using 27 million barrels of oil per day, another 6 million. All of that will have to be imported unless we do some production. If we do really good efficiency initiatives, and one of them is this CAFE standards that's just been passed, and we start reducing the amount of oil we use in the transportation fleet, we can probably cut that back down to, by 2025, still having to use 22 million barrels of oil per year, even with great efficiency standards and alternatives. So we find ourselves in a dilemma here, and we're really vulnerable. Again, today I read in the Wall Street Journal where oil has gone up $10 a barrel over the last week or so. The OPEC nations have decided not to cut back production because they see the economy coming back, and therefore use will be increased significantly. And last year, when oil went from $40 a barrel to $140 a barrel, the United States military cost for oil went up by $13 billion per year. It's $1 billion per $10 a gallon. Now, $13 billion in this day and age, we've been throwing around these T words like trillion and bailouts and all these things, so billions don't mean as much anymore, but there's still a lot of money. And when you take $13 billion out of a budget of any budget, even though the military budget is huge, that makes a difference. And it starts waking you up a little bit. So, big issue for us. Last year, in 2008, we sent over $386 billion to pay for oil overseas to nations that most of which don't like us or try to interrupt things we do or disrupt what we do or are outright hostile to us. $368 billion to people who don't like us. Jim Woolsey, who used to be head of the CIA, works for Booz Allen now, made a statement I think is really telling. This is the first war since the Civil War where the United States has funded both sides of the conflict. I mean, the money going to these places, a lot of it's going to people that don't like us or are actually trying to do us harm, terrorists, so not a good thing. The energy threat also impacts our economy. We all know that, but we're in the middle of a financial crisis, hopefully bottoming out, and our approach to energy is part of the problem. Fred Smith from FedEx, who's a good friend of ours, says, and he believes this, and I think he's right, I wouldn't argue with the 10th richest guy in the United States, that last year when the economic crisis occurred, one of the catalysts, it isn't the reason for it, but one of the catalysts for it was when oil went up to about $4 a barrel, a gallon. Would be nice for $4 a barrel. But for $4 a gallon, that was about $3,200 to $3,500 per household in the United States. And for the people on the edge where the subprime really hit hard, that was the amount of money that they lost that they couldn't pay for their house, which actually was a catalyst for the fall. Now, obviously, there's a bunch of economic reasons why we had the problem, but that little bit of a change there made the big difference in our economy. Today, I've read, and I believe this, and I think they're conservative, but we've done a study, and the military has, that a gallon of fuel to an airplane being refueled any place, doesn't have to be in battle, any place, is $42 a gallon. A gallon of fuel in Afghanistan's, in Kabul, is about $15 a gallon. Now, that's not too bad, but a gallon of fuel to a forward operating base in Afghanistan is reportedly $1,000 a gallon. So it's very costly, and it makes a big difference. On our first report, as Sherri mentioned, the national security and threat of climate change, we showed that unless we take dramatic steps to slow it, climate change will lead to an increase in conflicts and an increase in conflict intensity all across the globe. Again, not an overstatement. Admiral McGinn and myself have had the good fortune to travel around the world to a lot and see different things. And I will tell you, there are a lot of fragile states out there that are on the edge of basically the instability and a disruption of how people live or their resource or sources of food. Or, as a matter of fact, in the Sudan, with the conflict there, the Darfur conflict that people probably have heard of, that was actually precipitated by a conflict over arable land by two tribes in the Sudan. And that type of activity could happen more often, we think. So we had stated, as Sherri said, that climate change is a threat multiplier. It can make all of our existing security threats much greater, and will, unless we do something about it. And it's in that context, a world shaped by climate change, that we must now address energy choices. We cannot pursue energy independence by taking steps that would contradict our energy or emerging climate policy. And the word independence is a kind of I think a false concept as well, too. independence in a global economy where we're so connected globally, and globalization is here to stay and it's not going to change, for us to be a totally different type of fuel than anybody else in the world would use would just be unrealistic. So we can't get into independence. It has to be a global type of approach to this. From an installation standpoint and domestically, we found that America's domestic electricity grid, and you've probably all read about this, but it's true, is in fact a serious threat to our national security. Interesting enough, a branch falls on a wire in Ohio someplace and the East Coast goes black. Well, that's a pretty fragile energy grid, I'd say. And so nearly all of our stateside military installations depend on domestic electricity from the grid. When it fails, critical elements of our military and homeland security systems can also fail and impact missions overseas. There are other reasons to consider upgrades to the grid. We see the national security reasons. We see them as national security reasons. Confronting this energy challenge is paramount for the military, and we call on the Department of Defense to take a leadership role in transforming the way we get, use energy in the military. By addressing its own energy security needs, DoD, the Department of Defense, can stimulate the market for new energy technologies and vehicle efficiencies. Today, the United States Navy is looking at fueling their ships with algae-produced fuel. And when I first heard about algae as a fuel, I thought, well, that's pretty unique. Of course, on the other hand, that's where all oil comes from originally. But the good news about algae is it's going to be plentiful. It's relatively clean to make. It burns a little better. It's got a better octane than regular fuel, and it doesn't have to have a new infrastructure to move it around. So that's a good alternative, I think. These new technologies, as I said, will help, and the vehicle technologies are important. But one of the things we all know and we found out and we've reiterated to ourselves during these studies is that there isn't any one solution ever. Every time you come up with one solution, there's a negative side to that solution. Either, just like biofuels there for a while with corn ethanol. Corn ethanol was a hot topic a couple of years ago. Still is relatively important, but all of a sudden we kind of found out that, wow, the price of corn went way up, and the farmers that are trying to feed their whatever they're feeding with corn was so expensive they couldn't afford it. It affected everything else. The fact of the matter isn't very much of that. It's not necessarily that clean. It's got a different infrastructure. You can't put it in regular fuel pumps because it mixes with water. So that was a cool idea for about a year, and then that became not so good. So there's a negative part to almost every alternative to this, and the real issue is you have to do a whole bunch of everything to do it right, and we need to do that ourselves. Now, for the military, for example, making electric vehicles sounds like a pretty cool idea. The problem is it's hard to make a battery big enough to make a 70,000 pound vehicle move. And like General Sullivan said last week, the problem in places like Iraq or Afghanistan or other places where the enemy has developed these explosive devices that can flip a 70,000 pound vehicle over on top of itself, mass means something. So to make a vehicle light, mobile, nimble, using less energy, let's say, becomes a dangerous issue for our troops. So I mean, there's always something, but we're going to have to work on it. So some, I think, probably are surprised to hear former generals and admirals talk about energy efficiency and renewable energy, but they shouldn't be. As Sherri mentioned, and we've all learned, that the military learned that force protection isn't just about protecting weak spots, it's about reducing vulnerabilities before you get into harm's way. And that's what this work is all about. And we're proud to do it. So I'll take that, and we'll take questions later, but now I'd like to introduce Admiral Denny McGinn. Denny?
Thank you, Chuck, Sherri. Thank you all for coming and for your interest in this vital topic that has so many key consequences to our national security. I want to address the question, what does all of this mean, not just to DoD and government agencies and departments, but what does it mean to the American people? Let's think about the context of this report and the enormous stakes. Global climate change will pose serious threats to water supplies and agricultural production, leading to mass migration in some cases. At the same time, we'll see an increasing demand for a dwindling supply of fossil fuels. These factors mean an intense competition for key and vital resources around the globe, and that leads to conflict. And the United States and the United States military cannot assume that we will be untouched by these conflicts. We have to understand how they will play out, and we need to prepare for them where we cannot mitigate their effects or prevent them. I'd also like to refer back to an earlier conflict. And this highlights something very different about this report, different from the first report in 2007, and I believe from many other reports involving military leaders. That is because in it we make a direct appeal to the American people. We talk in this report of the amazing sacrifices the American people made during World War II, planting victory gardens, cutting down on fuel use, saving scrap metal and old rubber, sacrifices, which is, I guess, a word we tend to avoid these days, of good times or relatively good times. They could be called sacrifices, or maybe they were just examples of common sense, frugality, and prudent lifestyle changes. Whatever you call them, the steps taken by the American people then shortened the war and saved lives. And I believe the same can be said today about these challenges of energy security and climate security. There are individual steps that every American can take. Using less energy, being more efficient with the energy that we do use, supporting new policies to help our country take a new energy path. These are the steps that can help us avoid or shorten wars in the future, those wars over competition for vital resources. These are steps that can save lives. They may cost money, yes, but if we don't spend the money now, primarily thinking of it as an investment, we'll still pay, and will pay much more later. In fact, very likely, we'll pay in American lives lost. American civilians played an important role in World War II because they understood the stakes and because they were asked to do so. General Wald made the stakes clear, and our report makes the stakes clear. Our current energy posture poses a significant and urgent threat to our national security, militarily, economically, and diplomatically. Hopefully, more Americans will understand these stakes and that these consequences will affect them. Hopefully, more Americans will hear the very direct request from our Commander-in-Chief and from this small group of a dozen retired admirals and generals. The American people, all of us, through our energy choices, can contribute directly to the security of our nation. And reflecting on General Wald's remarks, to achieve the end state, a transformation, a true transformation in the way we generate and use electricity and other forms of energy in America requires a national effort and leadership from the highest levels of government. In all of this, there's a tremendous benefit and a great opportunity. It is a triple win. It reduces our dependence on oil, it reduces the impact on the environment, and it makes our nation very, very much secure. And despite the pleas by General Wald and Sherri Goodman for me to continue to talk for a couple of hours so that they wouldn't have to answer any tough questions, I'm going to conclude my remarks, turn it back over to Jeff so that we can hear what's on your mind and give you our best judgment. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you all for giving us an overview of this report that I think some folks have had a chance to see or read about because it has garnered quite a bit of attention in the press in just the few, I guess, not even 2 weeks that it's been out. But let's turn it over to the floor because as Sherri pointed out, there are a number of you who are working on these issues. Some of you have been working on them for a very long time. Some of you have this in your inbox in various ways in terms of finding ways to operationalize or put into action pieces of what this report touches on. And so we want to have you to have the opportunity to ask advice of these three in terms of how to take this the next step forward. So as I mentioned, we'll ask you to use the microphone and identify yourself and pose your question. And who would like to kick us off for the discussion?
Thank you very much for being here.
Sir, there's always that they got to collect.
Henry Hedger, researcher at NARA. I've been recently reading about Sasol, the South African company that converts coal into oil, and it's been going on for more than 50 years. They're currently meeting 36% of their national needs, a fairly substantial amount. I know the military has an experimental program in Montana to convert coal into oil. I don't know exactly where it is. But this is another means other than algae, which was mentioned. I'm sure there's even many other ways, but it appears to be something that's more surefire, I think, and it's already been underway for many years. What are your feelings on this, and where is it right now?
One of the problems, it's a great question, and it really illustrates this inextricable nature of three challenges: energy security, climate security, and national security. The South African process is a variation on the Fischer-Tropsch process of converting coal to liquids that was developed in the interwar years and helped sustain the Nazi regime during the war, when supplies of oil were cut off, and it obviously came into its own in South Africa during the apartheid sanction periods. The problem with it is it produces over twice as much carbon from mine to wheels, if you will, or end use for a gallon of coal to liquid. Specifically to your question about the U.S. Air Force, and General Wald can give us a very, very comprehensive answer on that. There was an initial effort, some exploratory experiments, if you will, and demonstrations of the Air Force using alternative forms of fuel that were derived from coal and, in fact, some biosources as well. The Air Force was asking exactly the right question. How can we ensure America's security and energy security by broadening our portfolio of sources for jet fuel? And they continue to do that, but not with coal to liquid. The coal to liquid basically ran into some issues related to legislative language in the past year, as well as some pretty daunting technical and economic costs. The Montana plant was estimated at industrial scale production to be as high as $6 billion to produce the kind of quantities that would be desired.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the Air Force Research Lab did the study to come forward and actually advocate for coal to liquid being the alternative for the United States Air Force for the exact reasons that Admiral McGinn talked about. And there was a little bit probably, you got to be careful. I mean, we talked about it during my presentation that there's always something negative about something that sounds too good. And part of it was their briefing at the time, and I was still in the Air Force at the time, so I wasn't criticizing from afar, stated that coal to liquid fuel actually burned cleaner than regular petroleum or fossil fuel or JP4 or kerosene, if you will. And it does. The problem is, like Denny says, it's 2.5 times dirtier to produce it. So they kind of got caught speeding there a little bit. And the 526 provision of the energy legislation said you can't have any synthetic fuel that produces basically dirty emissions in the military. So that's gone away. So now the Air Force and the Navy particularly is in the lead on this, and the military in general is switching over to this algae as one of the alternatives. The problem is going to be, again, though, on any of this is, if you look at it, national security from Maslow's theory, obviously, we want national security. We don't want to lose our security in our nation. So, in the meantime, I'm sure people probably, if it meant the difference between having a secure nation or burning coal for the next week or so, they'd probably burn coal. But we need a long-term solution. And the solution for the military, and we talked about this just before we came in a little bit, and we talked about it on our panel, is that whatever the military moves to has to be somewhat common in other places because of the accessibility, the reliability, the supportability, the logistics issues. Ironically, in Iraq, we're in an area where there's a huge access to basically gasoline. Even though it sounds tough to get there, it is, but it's there. Afghanistan is a little different, by the way, which hasn't been talked about much, but if you've watched the news, one of the big issues in Afghanistan lately has been the logistics resupply for Afghanistan and some of the attacks that have happened on the eastern border of Afghanistan coming from Pakistan. That's a problem. The biggest problem in Afghanistan is there's no organic fuel in Afghanistan. So all the military fuel has to be shipped in, either by truck or by airplane, which is really an inefficient way to do it. So, yeah, I mean, if our nation were going to, if somebody were to tell you today, either you burn coal or you're going to lose your sovereignty, it would probably burn some coal. But I think our bottom line would be, before we would endorse more coal being used, it has to be clean, and there's some technology that has to be looked at, a sequestration, and even then, it's probably not going to answer all our problems, but for right now, that's not one of our recommendations.
If I can follow up, Sherri mentioned the fact that the 2008 Defense Authorization Act requires the National Security Strategy, National Defense Strategy, and the QDR take account of climate. And QDR anyway, and I presume the others too, but they're on their own timelines. But QDR, we're in the midst of it now. Are there aspects and priorities that, or items that you said this is kind of critical to get in there? And I ask that from the perspective of those of you who've operated under these guidance documents, and I'm particularly keen to understand what is it that would enable that combatant commander to be innovative, to take this as a priority, to understand how it is part of his threat assessment and risk assessment, as well as opportunity for engagement and strategic communications in partner countries. It obviously, those documents are both guidance, but they're also cover for innovation within. And so what is it that you see as key to, in some ways, foster the atmosphere to take these issues seriously in the building and perhaps more importantly, in the field?
Let me start, and then Danny, I know, has got some pretty strong thoughts on this. But one, the QDR, the Quadrennial Defense Review, every 4 years by law you have to do that, is ongoing. And there's a whole bunch of different things that are going on from the energy standpoint, but one of them is, and Secretary Ash Carter spoke at the rollout of the report a couple of weeks ago. He's the new Undersecretary for Acquisition Technology and Logistics. And one of the things the military is now having to do, which is a good idea, is to calculate the fully burdened cost of fuel for a new weapon system when it comes on. What is the belief the life cycle cost of that weapon system using fuel going to be, which will force developers and acquisition people to put that into the equation as far as something important. The other part of the things we talked about as far as availability of fuel, et cetera, is a huge part. And so I think the services have got the picture. Now, the other part is, even though, again, we have this huge defense budget, matter of fact, the United States spends more in defense than all the rest of the world put together, which is an unbelievable number when you think about it. But it's going to flatten out. It's going to go down. We expect a lot from our military. And so the margin of availability for discretionary funding in O&M, let's say, operation and maintenance, is really going to be hit hard. And people are forced to make tough decisions when the budget gets tight. And I think one of the areas that we can really find some efficiencies, not just the other issues on national security, climate, and all the other things, but just from a pure budgetary process, is let's try to find a more readily available and a more effective, cost-effective fuel. So there's no doubt it'll be addressed.
As you point out, Jeff, the QDR, National Military Strategy, National Strategy documents provide an umbrella framework under which various people in the department will operate. And that is a good start, but it isn't sufficient to really get the kind of change that we've been talking about in the report. What is necessary, and we make a specific recommendation in our roadmap, is that DoD needs to define what we call it the carbon boot print of the department. And this goes to a real strength of the department in particular, in that the department's very good at measuring things, at accounting for things, and planning. And if we really understand how much fuel we're using, what the various forms, what our various technology platforms and fuel choices, energy choices, and practices are producing in a way of a carbon boot print, we'll have a good baseline no matter what kind of carbon policies are adopted by the United States. Good baseline to measure from and then improve on. The other thing that I think is really important, and it goes more to culture than it is in any large organization than it does to overarching documents, and that is the danger, I think, in this regard is everybody's busy. Everybody has a lot on their plate. They're overflowing in many cases. What with production of things like the QDR, a very, very significant set of changes in the budget that was submitted by Secretary Gates, the usual complexity of trying to plan for the future while you're fighting two wars in the present. It's really, really tough. And there's going to be a very natural tendency by individuals and organizations to think that climate change and energy security are somebody else's job. You know, DOD or DOE is doing that, or once there's an official designated in the Pentagon to oversee all things energy related to the department, the natural tendency will be to think that's somebody else's job. And I think what we really, really need is to, just as I was talking about the American people, we all have a role to play. Everybody in the Department of Defense, agencies and services, everybody in the intergovernmental process, all departments and agencies, needs to take this view that it may not be my entire job, it may not be a major portion of my job, but believe me, it is part of my job. I am part of the solution, or I'm part of the problem. And I think owning the problem and owning and working towards a solution set is going to produce the needed cultural change that will help avoid some of the consequences that we talk about.
Secretary of Defense Gates and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Mullen, have both talked and made a priority of global engagement strategy. The opportunity here is to, as we address the threats of climate change and energy security, to do that in a way that enhances our global engagement strategy. So our regional combatant commanders can use this as part of their engagement strategies in their regions to reach out to other nations to build resiliency, to develop cooperative relationships to reduce the risks of climate change in the future, and to cooperatively develop energy strategies that most nations will need as we move towards new energy futures.
Yes, the gentleman down. Now we have a bevy of them. Okay, go ahead. Yep.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jim Turner from NOAA. One of the places where climate change is certainly most apparent is the Arctic, and and one can certainly foresee growing pressure to exploit the energy and natural resources as well as the marine resources in the Arctic, and that perhaps leading to some military conflict. And so, as the U.S. as an Arctic nation, do you have any thoughts on how we can manage this so that we don't work at cross purposes with climate change and energy, and so that this situation also doesn't get out of hand, so that we have military problems up there also?
Yeah, I'll just there's Denny can talk to the Navy part because it's a Navy generally issue from a military perspective. But again, last night Jim Jones, I think if you put one theme in his discussion, it was re-engagement and the reset word with Russia's there, but it's kind of reestablishing ourselves internationally and looking at things in a more sophisticated way from the standpoint of threats, and dialoguing and engaging in a common approach to solving problems. One of the first things that happened that I recall when this became pretty common as an issue was Russia went up and put a titanium flag down. The Canadians steamed up there. The United States Navy's out there, and I think Denmark was part of it too, if I'm not mistaken. So, the mad rush to see who was going to get it because there's energy sources out there, and plus it's, a big geostrategic issue. Those types of things need to be discussed internationally. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in Copenhagen and the United States' approach to the new Kyoto renewal, whatever that is. But I was encouraged again last night because, there is a huge shift in thinking in Washington. Jim Jones is a strategic thinker, and not just because he's my friend. He's got it. This world is global. There's big global issues that need to be engaged together, and people need to realize that the other side has an opinion and has issues that they care about. But the problems are only going to be solved through an international process, and there's a lot of distrust of the United States still right now from the standpoint of us not necessarily dialoguing very well. So that's going to take a little time. But the Arctic and other places are not a single nation problem. They're a global problem. And that's the only way I think it could be addressed, personally.
I think in very strong support of Chuck's observations, the watchword in the Arctic will be cooperation rather than competition. There's always a possibility of competition on specific fishing grounds or mineral rights or whatever, but I think those will be more likely worked out by international accords and bilaterals, multilaterals, et cetera. Where I think we really need to worry, I reflect back on the 2007 report by the Military Advisory Board on climate change and national security. It is in the known zones of instability where fragile states, given the additional pressure of climate change, will become failed states. And those vacuums of power will be filled by extremist forces, and could quickly lead from a deprivation of basic human needs, water, food, agriculture production, shelter, etc., to regional conflict because of those extremist elements trying to carry out their agendas. So while the Arctic may be a concern, it does not even get into the same severe category as these known zones of and projected zones of instability where fragile states are a real concern right now. The way I think about this is the consequences of climate change unchecked. Imagine a world in which there are Darfurs, Somalias, Pakistans, and Bangladesh responding to the latest typhoon that are happening much more frequently with much more intense and widespread consequences, and will create an overwhelming demand on developed nation resources to try to help in some way. That's why I think in terms of defining, as Sherri pointed out, Secretary Gates and the Chairman, trying to figure out ways of global engagement for all of our national instruments of power, but especially the military. We need to think in terms of what can the military do and other parts of our government to prevent climate change where it can be prevented, mitigate it where it cannot be mitigated, and then adapt where neither prevention nor mitigation is an option. And it provides a tremendous focus area, many focus areas, for our military to work with their counterparts around the world in some of these states that have some daunting challenges to work on projects that can put them in far better shape to withstand the changes that are inevitable and we're already seeing with climate change.
Well, Jim, you are correct that the signs of climate change in the Arctic are a bellwether. We see them more vividly there than in much of the rest of the planet today, and it's important for us from the standpoint of climate science to pay attention to them. It's also, we have an opportunity now in the next 5 years or 10 years before there is a real race for resources in the Arctic, before the summer sea ice allows regular passage through the Arctic, to put in place those types, an international regime that is resilient, that will ensure cooperation in future decades. So in my view, the U.S. should ratify the Law of the Sea Treaty. Okay, that's an obvious first step. It's in our national interest. We should also step up global leadership with other Arctic nations, both through the Arctic Council, through looking at there are many innovative ideas coming out now about how better to preserve the Arctic, from ideas on marine preserves for portions of it and other ways to sort of protect that important ecological resource for the planet while preserving it for sustainable uses. Thanks, Jim.
Okay. Well, we should go to our Canadian friends then, since we're talking about the Arctic.
And of course, I'm not going to ask a question about the Arctic. Hello, I'm Anne Rimmer from Natural Resources Canada. My question concerns the notion of an energy mix and where nuclear power would play a role in that, which obviously burns cleanly but has a security risk in and of itself.
Go ahead. I mean, I think nuclear power is a big part of the mix. You know, as a matter of fact, I think one of the senators from Tennessee today called for 100 new nuclear plants, $700 billion investment today. It's not going to happen for a while. It's pretty hard. But the good news about nuclear, it's pretty clean, real clean. It's part of the mix. But we're in the process now of looking at replacing all of our nuclear. By the way, the biggest nuclear user is the United States Navy, for those that know how to do it. But if we replace them all starting by 2016, I think it would take us probably 20 years to do it, and it's probably $9 billion per plant, and it's going to be very difficult to do. It's not easy technology. But they do have safer technology now. The issue is, how do you store the used fuel, or what do you do with it? But if we do all that, we do as much possible wind as we think we can in a reasonable amount. We do solar as much as we possibly can. We do algae as much as we can. We're still going to have high demands for regular type fossil fuel until we do something really dramatic in this country to shift it. You know, one of the things up in Canada they talked about up in the oil sands, I called them tar sands, got thrown out of Alberta, but is they were thinking about putting a couple nuclear plants up there to make the steam. And that's pretty dramatic for a Canadian to say they might do that. The U.S. Air Force was looking at putting nuclear power plants on their bases and then selling the excess electricity to the local community. But the answer on the diversification is we need it all. We need a lot of it now. There are things you can do to be smarter about it. I think if we could use different types of energy sources to create more electricity and then robust the grid and then transfer a lot of our transportation over to electric, that would be probably the biggest thing we could do. But yeah, nuclear internationally is a big thing. Proliferation is a problem. And so from an international standpoint, which this is all about international, we're going to have to come to grips with the fact if we promote clean energy use, and nuclear power is one of those sources, we're going to have to build a regime that says we can protect the consequences of say, the proliferation of used energy or something. That's a huge issue. And Jim Jones talked about that a lot last night. But yeah, it's a good point.
I would add that if you take a look at alternative energy sources, the whole portfolio of energy, including fossil fuels, there are certain areas of the nation and certain areas of the world, indeed, that lend themselves better to some forms of energy than others. A good example is the American Southwest. Be a pretty good bet for solar. The American upper Midwest in particular, pretty nice for wind. There are states in the United States and nations around the world that are blessed with abundant hydroelectric power, geothermal, and the list goes on. And I think about nuclear power, particularly global nuclear power, as in the same way. There are certain areas of the world for a whole variety of not just physical and geological characteristics or climatological characteristics, but for political and social and cultural issues that you just don't want to do nuclear power. And you need to have a regime, as Chuck mentioned, under which we can, in fact, gain the benefits of nuclear power but also do it in a way that carefully manages their risks and minimizes their risks. And that is not, nuclear power should not be a one-size-fits-all. Whoever wants it gets it. There have to be the right kinds of conditions, physically and technologically and politically, in order to do it right. And finally, as Chuck mentioned, the Navy does have quite a lot of knowledge about managing nuclear power and using it effectively and safely. And we, I think, need to recognize that that didn't happen overnight, and we're not going to ramp up, as General Wald said, to a huge proportion of our electrical demands being met by nuclear power, because of it's an infrastructure, it's an educational system, technological challenges that need to be addressed. Final point. One of the things that I think would be very, very, very important to do is let's take the uninformed emotion out of the nuclear discussion. There is so much bull out there about everybody has almost a Pavlovian dog response to nuclear power that answers something along the lines of 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl or something, the China syndrome. And it really, really takes away a tremendous opportunity for us if done properly. And even the discussion about spent nuclear fuel, Yucca Mountain, et cetera, is so fraught with misinformation and emotion. And we really need to be much more objective, much better informed as Americans in government and as citizens about this whole thing of nuclear power. It is not a silver bullet. I fully agree with General Wald that we need to put as many options on the table as possible, but we need to do it as objectively and as science and engineering based as we possibly can.
You know, it was like Admiral McGinn said, this truth in lending issue. That's a good point. And the issue, I mean, most everybody cares about energy security, national security, and everything, and they all have their one kind of solutions. Not everybody, but a lot of people have a single solution set. So, you know, debunking the myths is one of the huge parts of it. But from a used to be nuclear waste, now it's spent fuel or used fuel. From that standpoint, I was talking to, I guess, the head of the National Energy Association Commission. And if you take all the used fuel, and for all the nuclear power the United States has used, including the Navy, since the first nuclear power plant was built, and put it in 55-gallon drums and stack them on top of each other, it would fill a football field up to the goalpost. That's it. Now, of course, that's a lot of used fuel, but it's not a big storage problem. So, I mean, we need to get on with it. We're going to use nuclear energy for the foreseeable future, and we just need a good regime for it.
If we go down here and then the back, and I think because there's so many hands, maybe we'll take a couple and then allow you to. So we'll go here and then all the way to the back.
Hi, Stephen Dahl, recently back from Oxford. I'm curious if you could reflect on the governance aspect of this, because it seems like the military has enough difficulty in terms of pork projects and weapons acquisitions and things like this. And if you look at ethanol, a thing of marginal benefit for the environment, but perhaps very politically appealing, I wonder how you think the governance system needs to be improved to come up with real benefits.
That's a great question for Sherri.
Why don't we capture a couple more, because there are lots of hands. Brian, all the way to the back, or Kaylee, you got it? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Dan Bowker. I'm with Navy's QDR office. We have a pretty good understanding of what the climate change threats are going to be, but my question is, since they are threat multipliers, does it really change the way we fight? And if it does or does not change the way we fight, and there's no money attached to it, how are you going to get people to listen?
I can answer that. And Danny will have his own opinion. First of all, I ran the QDR for the Air Force 1 year, so I sympathize with you. We have never, that I know of, predicted a conflict yet, except the one we started, you know. So, well, I mean, it's true. We talk like, I mean, we have a big problem. QDR people are supposed to predict the future and develop a strategy and then develop the, you know, the wherewithal to do that. It's hard. So we end up doing a whole bunch of things to kind of cover our bases, and we predict potential threat. Sherri mentioned it earlier. We don't take huge risk in the military. You can't because the consequences aren't good. But I think a couple things need to be thought about. One, the one that eats at me all the time as we study these reports is this whole issue of common fuel availability for the Defense Logistics Agency. They have and the services have this problem. You know, if you look back on how we got into what we are today, there's probably a lot of reasons, but the one that I fall back on was Winston Churchill, when he was the Lord of the Admiralty of the British fleet, changed over from coal to oil. One of the most strategic decisions, I think, in the history of military warfare, for sure, but maybe even in general, because of the more available or the more availability of oil, let's say. That was a big decision, and it's made a difference up until now. That was almost 100 years ago. So when the Department of Defense decides on weapon systems, they're going to have to start factoring in. I mean, we get for those that don't know, the B-52 bomber is going to be 90 years old when we retire it. So that's not going to be the same for all weapon systems, but most of them are going to be with us for a pretty long time, particularly the large ones. You know, aircraft carrier, what do you refuel every 20 years or something like that? So when you make those decisions on what it's going to be, it's for a long time. That's number one. So we need to be smart, I think, about what our future acquisition is. Two is, I don't think anybody would have predicted, and I was a recipient of this great performance, but that we would send enlisted people into Afghanistan riding around on horses with saddles on, wooden saddles, by the way, with a laptop computer and a SATCOM antenna on their back, calling in GPS-guided bombs from a 55-year-old bomber. Nobody ever thought that was going to happen. Now, of course, it's second nature now. So I guess the point would be is you need to kind of look in the future and say we don't want to get something that would really put us in a bind because it's so exotic or so unique that we could get ourselves limited. And two is, unfortunately, you have to kind of build in for a lot of different consequences. And three, if there's a 50-50 chance that climate change is going to cause huge disruptions in populations or food availability or resources, it's not even a little bit hard for me to imagine 17 million Bangladeshis trying to beat on the door of India, let's say, for example. That's a huge problem. And so you have a tough time on the QDR, but you need to factor this in.
Okay. On the governance piece, your question goes in good measure to how to work with Congress. I think the Defense Department is more fortunate than our Energy Department in having a primary authorizing committee and a primary appropriations committee. The Energy Department has many different committees in the Congress, so it's more vulnerable both to earmarking and also to competing and conflicting guidance for its many programs. Now, that's not to say DOD is exempt from that, but and nor is it exempt from earmarking, as you know, Senator McCain and others have led the way. I think the important thing for DOD is through the QDR and other mechanisms to have a strategy and an approach and a set of programs and policies that it puts forward that's supported by the president, and that's a national strategy. Then you're better able to present that program to Congress and to make the case that earmarking and special interests detract from a national effort. And DOD has been fairly successful. It's been successful in certain areas in doing that. Not totally, and I wouldn't expect that this would be completely free either. But I think if you start from a strategic approach and make the case, you're in a better position.
Yeah, can I just make another comment on that? I agree with you. And maybe there are other examples, but I think this may be a unique time for a problem like this, and that is that the DOD, you've identified you have a problem. You've got to predict the future and do what you can about it. But it isn't just, in this case, this particular problem isn't just a DOD problem. This is in our case, a national problem. It's a global problem. And so I think one of the things you should articulate and advocate and debate and bring up in your discussions in the QDR is, hey, listen, guys, gals, whatever we pick for the future is going to have to be something that has an ubiquitous nature to it. It's going to have to be pretty common. So we can't give up one problem and then buy ourselves another one. Because one of the things that people concern themselves with is when you talk about hybrid vehicles or electric vehicles driven by batteries, let's say, with the lithium ion or others, that there are only certain places in the world you can get cobalt. So now all of a sudden, it isn't Saudi Arabia that's holding us up with OPEC. It's Brazil or Venezuela or someplace. I don't know where it is. Bolivia, I guess they have it. So you got to think through those things, and like Kim Huntley over at DLA's working it hard. I mean, as soon as they figured out 526 and the provision that says you can't have dirty synthetic fuel, they dropped coal like a bad habit and went to algae. So I mean, somebody's thinking about it.
Okay, yes, down here. And then we'll make our way in the back.
Hi, Sally Schlichting. Given that the military, as I understand it, spends about 50% of its budget on protecting oil routes and oil transportation routes, is that correct?
I don't know. I don't think anybody's ever figured that out.
All right.
Sure.
It's a lot, though.
Yeah.
Let's say that the U.S. is successful in significantly reducing its dependence on foreign oil. To what extent do you see the military continuing to be tasked with protecting these oil routes around the world for our allies and so on?
Okay. I'm just going to give a quick answer. The type of energy we use necessarily is not going to change with the fact that we have to protect sea lanes or pirates or whatever. So, it'd be nice if we didn't have to worry about 17 million barrels of oil going through the Straits of Hormuz and the other 25 or so, or actually 50 million barrels, 50% of all the fuel goes through the Malaccan Straits to the Persian Gulf. That's a problem. But that's not going to change the fact that we need to protect the sea lanes, I don't think at all. Matter of fact, globalization is going to demand that we have the commons, which is the sea, and Navy does, U.S. Navy in this case, is really the largest contributor in the world to keeping those sea lanes open. There's other people that contribute, but I don't see a change.
I'd like to segue off maybe General Wald's answer in your question to say that, and General Wald mentioned this in his opening remarks in relation to independence, oil independence in the United States. It's really a myth because right now oil is the lifeblood of the global economy, and we are inextricably attached to the global economy for a whole variety of goods and services. So it isn't just a United States challenge to move off of our reliance on fossil fuels for all of the reasons we've said. It's a global challenge, and it's one in which the United States has to play a key leadership role, not just to reduce the role of the U.S. military in protecting that lifeblood arteries for oil that we have today, but for all of the other reasons that relate to climate change and relate to us being a key leader in the global stage.
Okay, we had about 3 in a row right up there. Why don't we just go straight up the line?
Andy Patterson with Verdigris Capital. We're in the financing side on seeing this energy shift take place. We were involved in a number of studies with DOE that were trying to get procurement policy changed at DOD to enable finance. We weren't looking for DOD to finance it, but I don't see anywhere in the report where you're addressing procurement policy that enables finance. Everything we're trying to do in shifting the energy economy is going to be capital intensive. We can't build coal gasification plants to make airplane fuel if you're only buying it 1 year at a time. That's an impossibility in the current finance environment. The same could be said for batteries. The same could be said for all kinds of components. Unless you put procurement policy at the front of your agenda, you're not going to enable the finance that can move the entire landscape, not just the DOD, down the road. And finance is where we need the lift right now.
Yeah, Undersecretary Carter, as we mentioned, was there to give us a speech at the rollout of this report. And he articulated that very clearly, that part of the solution is going to have to be acquisition reform and procurement reform as far as funding. So he's well aware of it, and he's that's one of his objectives. You know, we probably could have made it more specific in the report, but that's certainly one of the issues, no doubt about it.
Now OMB won't let you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's why you need both acquisition procurement reform legislation and leadership and guidance.
It goes to the governance question that was asked earlier too. You need to have some sort of a predictable policy environment, stable policy environment, to attract the kinds of capital to produce, to develop and deploy, mostly deploy the technology we need. There's an analogy here to what we've been debating for many, many years in the United States, and that has to do with production tax credit and investment tax credit for renewable energy, for example. Same dilemma from an investor standpoint. If somebody's getting ready to ramp up production, if you will, or make the capital investment to produce, let's say, windmills for wind power, they don't want to be looking at an entirely different balance sheet next year when the rug is pulled out from under them for not having an investment tax credit. So stability and policy, predictability is absolutely key, and it has to go, as General Wald said, where it is within the authority of the Secretary of Defense or the Undersecretary for AT&L. In terms of procurement policy, there's a part there, but there's also a part in legislation as well.
There's a conceptual analogy here to a program that was launched in the 90s to improve military family housing that enabled privatized housing by changing scoring rules and contracting rules. It took a lot of effort, including by the Secretary of Defense and with OMB and the Congress, to put that in place. It's been quite successful and improved the quality of military family housing. I think there'd be an opportunity to do that here with energy as well. And if you're working in this area, I'd be particularly interested in your thoughts about how that legislation for military family housing could be adopted to address these energy issues.
In far too many cases in the department, in the individual services, and probably across government, the question usually is why we can't. And we got to change that culture, as I mentioned before, to why can't we? Why can't we do this? And it should be not a long litany of good ideas and innovation killers, but rather some real good innovations and ideas being able to go forward. And Sherri's example of the public-private venture for military housing is a good one. A lot of people said, well, you really can't do that. But when you really thought about it, why can't you do that? And I think that applies to energy efficiency investments as well as alternative sources of energy.
You know, I just was going to add, I was in California a couple weeks ago in Silicon Valley, and I just visited 3 places, and they're all doing different types of alternative energy, and they're all funded like crazy. I mean, venture capital. So, you know, again, there's a different issue here on the government side, and I think your point's well taken. But I think most everybody's kind of got the clue here that we're going to alternative fuels. It's a good market, and I think government will be the benefactor of some of this private investment here. So I feel pretty confident.
Yeah.
If we can go right. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm Rockefeller Harris with USAID, the Office for Development Partners and the Private Sector Alliance Division. Earlier during the presentation, you alluded to the reducing the footprint, if you will, in terms of speaking about the net impact for the defense's measures. I'm wondering if in your report or in the overall analysis, if there's any consideration for the cap and trade concept, as well as the role beyond the idea of new technologies and innovations coming from the private sector. What relationships or what roles do you envision the private sector playing in helping to mitigate or address these challenges of climate change?
I'll give a real quick answer, and then Danny's got more specifics. But from my perspective, the issue for the Department of Defense in our report was that carbon is going to have a price to it in the future, like it or not. Whether it's cap and trade, tax, something, I don't know. I mean, I know we're going down the cap and trade route, and that's complicated. But from a military perspective and from a DOD perspective and from the government use of energy, but mainly for, in this case, the DOD, it's going to be part of the cost. And so the boot print issue that I think Denny actually coined that phrase is not necessarily just a kind of a benevolent, nice thing to do. It's a financial and reality. It's a planning factor. So we kind of strayed away from giving a solution set to how do you put a price on carbon, but the fact is you have to recognize in your planning.
Yeah, and we really kind of steered away from endorsing a specific policy or a legislative solution. We're all, I believe, pretty pleased that the debate has been joined and it's ongoing. We've had some very, very fine interaction with former Senator John Warner, who many of you know, along with Senator Lieberman, introduced the Warner-Lieberman bill that was the very first viable piece of legislative proposal that would do something about carbon and greenhouse gases. And Senator Warner has told us very, very candidly it's going to be quite a long time, and as it should be, for something with as much impact, but it's something that will inevitably happen. And we did not want to endorse any one particular solution, but just recognize, as General Wald just said, there will be carbon regulation. So let's start doing some things at the DOD level and really, by implication, across the board to measure what we have now, and we'll be able to benchmark it and introduce some policies and technologies and solutions that will reduce that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Where President Obama was yesterday was at Nellis Air Force Base and gave a nice little endorsement for all the solar panels they're using out there. The greenest organization in the United States is the United States Air Force, accidentally, but it is because of all the thermal they use. So the reason I bring that up is not, and I can honestly say I know the Navy's doing some really unique things here this week to go to some potential alternatives. So the military, the DOD is doing a lot. The problem is we need to do a large lot. That's our point. We're going to really shift and over, and the carbon part is part of the issue. And so when you bring up coal to liquid, as appealing as that is, the fully burdened cost of a weapon system based on fuel cost, if all of a sudden the DOD, like everybody else, is going to have to pay X number of dollars for carbon, it gets pretty expensive. It's just like increasing the cost of a gallon of fuel or something. So that all has to be taken into consideration.
There's a rough analogy to. Well, I was going to ask Jeff. When we came up here, I couldn't find my cigarette ashtray anywhere on this, and I'm looking all around the room and I can't find any. And if it were a mere 40 years ago, we'd have probably smoke level down to about here. And, we'd just be happily puffing away, or many would, and others would be gagging, I guess. But it took a long time, but it started with education. The Surgeon General warning on a pack of cigarettes or what have you. And if you had gone back to, just 40 years and said, guess what? In 40 years, you're not going to be able to smoke in public buildings and auditoriums and this, and you're not going to be able to smoke in bars. What? No way. Yet it happened, and it happened through a whole variety of educational activities, regulations, taxation, etc. But we literally changed a key cultural dynamic, and it continues to change. And I think the same scope can be envisioned for dealing with carbon and greenhouse gases and the way in which we procure and the way and produce and the way in which we use energy.
The gentleman in the last row, yeah.
Hi, Keith Cole with General Motors.
Hi, Keith.
Sherri, it's been a long time. How you doing? I have a one comment is as we've watched this evolution, where it's very pleasant to see the move beyond the solution of the month, the single solution set that people are looking for. And we embrace that with a portfolio approach to vehicle technologies as well. But there is a downside to kind of all of the above, and that is that at least our perception is we see portions of the military off pursuing solar, we see portions off pursuing algae, off pursuing batteries. What we don't see is it tied together in a systems approach. So the solar folks aren't thinking about how do we take that energy, store it so we can use it in vehicles as electricity or hydrogen. How do we take biofuels and fuel both vehicles and the electric grid? How do we unlock the potential of looking at this from a systems approach as opposed to a bunch of rifle shots seeking a solution? And I'm wondering if your thinking in this report gets at that, or is that kind of the next step beyond this?
No, I think
well, maybe you're helping us define the next report there, Keith.
Actually, are you related to Ken Cole?
I work for him, but I'm not related.
I've talked to Ken Cole about this a lot. Let me just real quickly, and then I'll get out of it, Sherri, but the report kind of does allude to that from the standpoint of that the DOD needs a broad planning strategic approach to this thing. And right now there hasn't been that. I mean, the services are doing some nice things, and one of your counterparts sitting behind you, the Navy's working it hard, the Air Force is kind of doing their thing. And it's not necessarily they're currying for favor, it's just, they're kind of doing their own thing. It needs to be coordinated. You need to have a strategy. The government needs to have a strategy writ large. So I would agree with you. I mean, we're all over the map. And what your frustration, I'm sure, is where do you start putting your money, to try to meet the demand. But that's one of our recommendations, and I think they're close to hopefully appointing a person that would be in charge of actually developing a more broad strategy writ large from a DOD perspective, and that's no doubt about it needed.
I agree with that, Keith. Our report laid out a roadmap and it set some priorities. So it said, look at the first develop that strategy. That's the essence. And look at energy efficiency as the low-hanging fruit. And then we listed a number of other priorities there. But the strategy is what is going to drive it. And, we're coming off a time where there wasn't as much focus on this. And now there's many flowers that are blooming right now. Some of them should continue to bloom, but they should be, strategically focused, absolutely, to take advantage of the greatest opportunities in a strategic way.
One of the downsides of the good things that the services are doing, for example, is that it gets that cultural aspect I mentioned earlier about, isn't somebody else doing that? And it feels good when you see large solar arrays, wind farms, biomass, geothermal out at the Navy's Weapons Center at China Lake, et cetera. But it isn't, as you say, comprehensive. It's points of advance on this, and the planning recommendation, which is our number one highest priority recommendation in the report, is an attempt to get DOD to wrap a whole comprehensive strategy around this business of how we power America.
Okay. Follow-up.
I wondered about Brazil and its military, Air Force, Army, and Navy. Are they operating on sugarcane-based fuel currently? Because that's one of their main products, or automobile.
I'm not sure about the Brazilian military, but I know that general aviation in Brazil has gotten way out in front of the government and the policy structure in that nation on basically, pardon the expression, do-it-yourself kits to convert your your private airplane from gasoline to ethanol because of its cheaper price and greater abundance down there. I think the regulation and the infrastructure's scrambling hard to catch up to that, but I don't think it's gotten to the point where the military is using a great deal of ethanol based. And it may not be ultimately, it may be the right thing right now for Brazil to do, but depending on the carbon footprint of that ethanol from field to end use, it may not be the right thing.
No, again, I mean, a little bit in the weeds or the switchgrass, whatever you want to call it, but in World War II, it was brought up earlier by Denny that this technology was used even before that by the Germans because they ran out of oil. The problem is the octane was lower and their performance in their fighter aircraft was decreased and it didn't work out so well. So there's always something negative, Brazil just, by the way, found one of the largest finds in recent times off their coast of regular oil, right? So that they're going to be using some of that. They still use some of it. Again, I think it was brought up by Keith Cole back there that there isn't any one particular solution that would solve any problem. There's always a downside to everything.
Can I broaden out that question, though? I know, at least in the 2007 report, you folks made some overseas trips to talk to counterparts in other countries and see the work that was being done there. And I see between the Danes and the Brits and the Canadians, some of them here in the room working on it. So obviously this report comes from the U.S. national security perspective. But two questions. With whom did you talk and learn from and see who's kind of looking at some of these same questions from other national perspectives? And second, is there advice that you feel is kind of generically good for other countries to take into account some of these same considerations and those lessons learned that don't necessarily have the U.S. perspective?
Sure. You want to talk about that?
Well, in our first report, we visited the UK and we met with the British Ministry of Defence, the Foreign Commonwealth Office, business leaders, state and local leaders, and we've had a continuing dialogue, and we still are engaged with them. Now, the energy security issues are different, different for different countries. Europe is much more concerned about its dependence on gas and oil from Russia. We have a different set of energy security issues in the United States, but they are all intimately related, and we are sharing information with them, and it is important that we continue to do so because ultimately the solutions will all have to tie together.
It's a good question now, and about 2 weeks I'm going to go to Germany and talk to number 2 and their Ministry of Defense about. They want to talk about what can we do to reinvigorate the transatlantic cooperation with the German military. And that's one of the things we can do, actually. And number 2 is, and we didn't report on it, we could do that some other time, and somebody ought to think about it, but, we are in NATO, and one of the big issues in NATO is interoperability and commonality of use of equipment, and they have these things called STANAGs, NATO standards. And so the other part is this tendency, I think, in the United States, even though I think everybody in here would probably consider themselves an internationalist or at least a coalition-type person. That's generally people that care about this stuff are usually like that. We have a tendency to, and when I was in the military, we even did this and I was part of NATO, is when we don't like NATO, it's them, and when we like them, it's us. And the fact of the matter is it's either us all the time or none of us. And we're going to do coalition in the future, I think, for the foreseeable future. That's the only way that problems can be solved. So that's a strategic issue that has to be addressed, and we're not there yet. But again, Jim Jones kind of alluded to it last night. Common problems in a new world. How do you find new partners, and then what are the common issues? One of them, just kind of as a tangent to this, is that cybersecurity is getting a lot of attention right now, as it should be. And we're in the process of starting a study with Russia, India, and China on cybersecurity. And you say to yourself, well, that's kind of a crazy thing. The Russians are out there trying to attack Georgia and Estonia, and the Chinese are after us all the time. But that's only probably a very small percentage of what really goes on. The global economy is so interconnected from even an ATM standpoint. You know, in Iraq and Afghanistan, we rent ATM time to do non-secure communications because you can do it. And so that is going to have to be addressed. What are the world commons, and what are the rules in those commons, and then how do we work to address those? And we're going to have coalition, and so if we're going to operate together, like I said, going back to the start point, we're going to have a way to figure out how to have a commonality of equipment and fuel.
Okay. Yes, gentleman in the back.
We've talked some about the issue of winners and losers. If nothing happens, for instance, all these natural resources in the Arctic that open up, if something does happen, your example about the cobalt being used for batteries, can you talk some more on the issue of winners and losers and what countries might benefit in either if we do something to stop global climate change or if we don't do something to stop global climate change?
I'll start by saying that if we don't do some significant things to stop global climate change, everybody's a loser in some measure. In terms of putting in place regimes and adopting technology and practices that address the causes of climate change, I think there can definitely be winners and losers to the extent that nations are forward in their thinking, have the long-range view, look beyond the next fiscal year to an entirely different world in which we have this so-called energy economy that has a much healthier and broader portfolio of energy sources that extracts the absolute most in terms of domestic or national product and quality of life from every unit of energy that we use. Those would be in the winners, and those who don't are going to be clinging to the old ways for far too long, and as a result, they miss an economic boom, and they also have to suffer longer with the consequences of all the negative consequences that we talk about in the report in terms of both energy security or energy insecurity and climate insecurity.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like the computer when it first came out. You know, there's some people had a computer, some didn't. They weren't connected. You know, we didn't have a wide area net. It was kind of the steam engine thing. It's kind of cool. Remember in the Pentagon, we got our first wide area or local area net was in 1985. And kind of interesting. And then all of a sudden it's the hockey stick. It zips off, you know. And today, I mean, it's unbelievable what's happening with computer technology. Same thing is going to happen with energy technology, I think. And for those who are, you know, McKinsey has done a study on this thing from the standpoint of economics. And there are going to be winners and losers. There's going to be people that predict or don't predict. You don't want to jump off the cliff as a point, you know, and be the first out there and make the leap. But smart people will recognize it, and those in the world that are either, you know, I'm not sure what Jim said last night about there's three types of people: those that recognize it and those that, you know, make things happen, etc. But it'll happen, and I think first of all, I think the United States will be on the winner side from the standpoint of recognizing it. All the discussion that's going on. This is not a unique discussion here today. It's probably unique in some ways, but generally this discussion is going on. It's been in the news. It's been in politics. It's been in the military. It's in the QDR. We're going to make it. Countries that kind of lag behind will have a problem. They'll be the economic losers to a certain extent. And then when we get into the climate change part, that's a totally different dynamic. Like Denny said, we're all losers because one of our concerns when we did the first report was that just because we think we have a choice, we really don't have a choice when you have an international catastrophe. I mean, every time there's a major problem in the world, we're a little slow in Rwanda, let's say, but mostly from a natural disaster standpoint, we always respond, and it's going to be more and more, and there's no way to get around it.
Yes, back again, Brian.
that feeds in pretty well to my next question, and that is, there's a lot of, I'm going to say, animosity or unwillingness for some of the nations in the world to take on U.S. forces and to have U.S. presence in their country. They see it as a negative thing. There's a lot of blowback from that. Yet, with climate change being brought into a national security threat standpoint, it argues for more increased U.S. involvement in these exact same areas. So there seems to be a tension between what the populace of those countries wants and what is in our national security interest. And so I'm wondering how you dissect this problem and make this an actionable and solution, or how does it become operationalized there?
Well, if we could get ahead of the curve, we would be addressing this not through military force, but as harnessing all the instruments of national power and using our civilian, our development resources, agricultural, diplomatic, economic, other assistance to help provide capacity building and resilience, not the United States alone, but in collaboration with other industrialized nations, to those countries most at risk, so they can develop capacity, develop improved agricultural practices, water management, dealing with water scarcity before disaster strikes. When catastrophes occur and lives are at risk or lives are being lost, there's usually less objection to U.S. military presence as a natural disaster relief or humanitarian rescue operation. As General Wald said, it's often 911 U.S. Navy when disaster strikes. But hopefully we can do better than that, and the QDR and other similar national planning documents can help mobilize the resources and set that national strategy in place.
Yeah, it's a good question, but it's how you do it. Yeah, for example, I went back to Kuwait after 9 years not being there in 1999, and I thought, boy, it's going to be great to be back here. We liberated Kuwait, and everybody's going to be happy. And I got there, they hated us. And what happens is people start resenting a military that kind of plops itself down in somebody else's country for a lot of reasons. Number one, they resent the fact that they're the recipients of this welfare, and it's a dignity issue. What in European Command, for example, and you don't want to make the military necessarily a USAID organization, although AID is a wonderful place, but the military can do a lot in stability ops, and that is part of the new solution set to international threats. In European Command, the other commands do it too, but we had teams that would go to Africa and train their militaries to be more professional, and the ethos rubs off. Now you have to do this for a long period of time for it to really work. But in conjunction with those deployments, they're usually 25 soldier deployments, usually an officer, a couple of corpsmen, and a couple dozen enlisted. We'd send a team of medical folks, and in the military, exercises are called flag exercises, red flags at Nellis, and people have seen movies about it. Well, there are things called med flags, medical flags. And we'd send a medical team. In this case, the first example was Chad. They were there for 2 months. They treated 6,000 Chadians that had never seen a doctor in their life before. They gave them new glasses, things like that. And that's probably what I think most people are talking about as far as actually influencing fragile states and stability. The debate is that, can we afford to do that? And do we have a special force to do that, let's say? And does that atrophy the real combat skills of a military force? So I think it can be done. I think we probably should do that. One of the things we did in European Command is ask the GAO to do a study on what the cost comparison is for prevention versus response. and the number comes out to about $1 of prevention saves $10 in response. And that's a pretty good business case. And like Sherri said, the dilemma we have that people are working through, it's not an unrecognized issue, and you guys are working on it, I'm sure, is how do you really develop the government in the United States, let's say, and by the way, it's not just our problem, it's our coalition partners too, to better respond to this, where it isn't just a U.S. military only problem, it's more of a shared government problem.
Think about it in terms of a fire department. You can have a huge fire department, lots of shiny equipment that's great at putting out fires, and do nothing in terms of fire alarms, sprinkler systems, education of the public, and you're going to keep that fire department pretty busy all of the time, and it's going to cost you a heck of a lot more than a 10x factor in terms of the prevention. So I think this key role and mission for military forces and all, as has been said several times, instruments of national power being used in a preventative and mitigative sense is really, really a great payback. And you just need to put in place the knowledge, first of all, in some cases, some technology, and in other cases, the practices, if you will, that will allow other nations to be more resilient in dealing with the effects of climate change and moving forward. And I think it's a good mission, it's a valid mission, and it's one that does not detract in any way from the primary mission of, if you will, putting out the big fires, but because it rests so much on the tremendous command control communications and intelligence aspects, and most importantly, in a tangible way, the logistics capability of the U.S. forces, it can have double value.
Terrific. Well, we've come to the one more question. We're almost at the end of the time, but if we can do it quickly, then we can.
It's a military strategy question. On Denny's question about winners and losers, I don't think Russia sees the world the way we do on climate change. I'm a cynic. I think they signed Kyoto Protocol just for the JI credits and to get WTO status. I think when you get them behind closed doors, they see climate change as an opportunity to grow more wheat, clear out the ice to explore more fossil oil in the Arctic. They're not playing the team game the way the rest of the world is. How does that affect our military and energy security strategy when other countries are not working on the same worldview?
Yeah, I've got an opinion on that, and I'll give it to you. I think...
Thank you, Chuck.
I think...
Talk to Chuck.
You know, well, you hit on something. I mean, I don't think we had a strategy with Russia over the last several decades, frankly. I mean, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. We took a collective sigh of relief, and Francis Fukuyama said the world came to an end, and it was the end of history, and we said, we're the sole superpower, let's go for it and make things happen. And 9/11 woke us up a little bit. Now we've been distracted, and we don't have a global strategy. We don't have a strategy to operate with Russia, and there needs to be something. Now, by the way, Russia's got their own interests. So if we think that we're just going to go out there and all of a sudden say, now that we're talking, why don't you do everything we want, it ain't going to work. But we've got to be more sophisticated about it. We've got to find out things that make a difference to them in both positive and negative way, see where their common interest. I mean, I really firmly believe, I'm probably naive, but that, we talked about it yesterday with Jim Jones. I think we ought to have a missile defense approach that's more global. We ought to bring in China and India in that, and Russia too, by the way, because we have common problems. I mean, now that's pretty difficult, but we should do that. We should talk to Russia in a more mature way. Jones is a lot more positive about Russia right now with Medvedev than people in the press give credit to. Again, he's the least naive guy I know. But yeah, those are issues. And they played the Kyoto deal like crazy. They made billions off it. I don't think anybody's real innocent on Kyoto, by the way. I mean, frankly, if you take a look at it, we're not going to go down this path very far, but there needs to be a new protocol. There's no doubt about it. China and India need to play. But, if I'm China and India and say, why should I start out at the same, difficult problem that you have, where you've had all these years to, dirty up the air, and now I'm starting with a penalty stroke. So I think India and China probably ought to start, but it ought to be a different level. So when we converge at some point, that's probably doable. Everybody else needs to be looked at in those regards. So very hard to do, new world, different threats, different dynamics, different geopolitics, and we have to have a different way of approaching things. And it's a leadership issue, and it's going to take some courage and effort. But yeah, we lost it on Russia. They played us like a drum, and we allowed it.
But I still wouldn't want to trade places with them.
Yeah, right.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we've come to the end of the time. It's obvious that there were a lot of rich questions in response to the three presentations. We thank you, CNA, and all three of you, Admiral, General, and Sherri. It's terrific that you've put in the effort to do a second one of these, go the next step, follow on. Sherri talking about next ones after that. We hope we will continue to look to you for insight and guidance and this kind of particular perspective that you and your fellow Military Advisory Board members can bring. So please, won't you all join me in thanking our panelists today for a fascinating discussion.